Hey, you got time for a beer? I know I do. My name's Jake. Welcome to my show. You can find me on Untapped, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, all at tubajake_69. Tell me your stories. I like to hear them. Sometimes I'll tell them on here. I'll try to get back to you about them if I don't tell them on here for sure. The beer I've got for you today, not really a beer. It's a cider, sort of. It's a perry. So basically it's a cider made with pears. They're usually pretty light and crisp, a little bit caramely, which is awesome. This one's from Uncle John's Cidery. What did that say on here? Because it was something very specific. Uncle John's Fruit House Winery is what it says on the bottle. So let's get this thing started. Open her up. Get it out here. Now it says it's made from Bartlett pears, which are pretty decent pears. It's not my favorite pear, but I mean, you get a lot more Bartlett pears here in Michigan, so it's not terribly surprising that they'd make them with Michigan Bartlett pears, especially since they're in the middle of Michigan. Yeah, so usually the ones that I've had have been a little bit more caramely than a cider, a little bit less sweet, which is nice. Effervescent is how I would describe this one. Yeah, I guess it kind of tastes like pears. It's definitely fizzy. Like it's coming up all over the place on this glass, which is kind of neat. Sour like apples, which if you picked Bartlett pears kind of green, that's what you'd get. I would think that you'd want to pick them closer to where they're closer to overripe to make this kind of a cider. I mean, technically it's a perry because it's 100% pears. What does this remind me of? Actually, the weird thing is this kind of reminds me of an apple juice spritzer, which is basically just apple juice and 7-Up. It's tasty. Super easy to drink. If you don't like beer and you really like 7-Up, this might be the way to go. But like I said, effervescent, lots and lots of bubbles, which can be good, but it was also weird that there wasn't a head on this either. Not anything really to make a head on it, because there's not going to be any proteins from the pears. It's like when you pour wine, you're not going to get a head on that. Got a feeling that champagne gets the bubbles on top, mostly because, you know, there's bubbles in it, but also because there's it's a little bit more concentrated, more sugar in the champagne. Let's see, what does this remind me of? What does this remind me of? Man. The weird thing is it actually reminds me of my very first apple juice spritzer. I was 2 and not living in my parents' house, obviously, because I was 2, but not in the one that they're living in now, the one that they lived in before this, that we lived in before this, because I don't know, they were drinking something and they were like, here, have this, it's really good. You know, it's like 7-Up and apple juice, and I like both of those things. But this kind of reminds me of that, which is strange. What else does this remind me of? Okay, so I read a story or something that one of my friends posted on Facebook about how down in the Detroit area there are Bartlett pear trees everywhere. And when the Bartlett pear trees bloom, the pear blossoms do not smell good. Like rotting garbage, not good. Like they smell disgusting. But if you're going to get more bugs to come and pollinate your blossoms, you're going to want it to smell like rotten garbage, because I don't know if you've ever had any rotten garbage, but it attracts bugs. Which I suppose is better than a ginkgo tree. Because when you get a ginkgo tree, the ones that produce the berries, the berries smell like death when they're rotting. It's kind of gross. Up at Central, they've got a few ginkgo biloba trees up there, and you can walk by Warner and you can smell them in the fall. It's disgusting. But kind of funny if you know what dead bodies smell like. Oh man, what does that remind me of? That reminds me of when they weren't looking as closely when we first got human anatomy courses at Central. And somebody invited me to see the dead bodies. Human anatomy. So they got to work with cadavers, which was interesting. And, it was like an open lab. So, just go in and look around. And like most of the people that were there were working on like, oh, these are the cranial nerves. And this is where this muscle attaches at this end and this end. That was probably the weirdest part. Like hips that were, like hamstrings that were torn apart into their individual muscle groups, or I guess it was quadriceps that were torn apart into their individual muscle groups so you could see where all of the different attachments were. That was strange, a strange thing to notice. For sure. I mean, not that it wasn't strange that I just wanted to go, because, I mean, it's interesting. How many times are you going to get to go see dead bodies? Not many, if you're not into that kind of a field. And it was interesting. I mean, like, I had an anatomy course, but we didn't have anything practical like that. I think the closest that we got, because it was anatomy of speech and hearing, so we got like videos and stuff like that, which was nice, but also kind of weird, because like they took a larynx and tied strings to the different attachments on the vocal folds so that you could hear what it sounded like when they got tight. It was very strange. And then seeing the breakdown of where the cranial nerves went from and to, like the vagus nerve goes everywhere. And it's Vegas because it means traveling. This isn't bad. It'd be real nice with cranberries, though. A cranberry-perry. Plus, it rhymes. And yet again, it would probably be a pink drink, which I kind of like, I'm not going to lie. All right, I've got a quote for you. This one is from Ella Fitzgerald, a great singer. She said, "Where there is love and inspiration, I don't think you can go wrong." Which also reminds me of another quote that I had actually from my anatomy teacher, the diaphragm is the major muscle of inspiration, which is true, obviously, but also if you're living, then you are creating. So love and creation. Can't go wrong. Anyway, you can find me at tubajake_69 at Untapped YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. I'd like to hear your stories. Tell them to me. I'd like that. I'll catch you next time when you got time for a beer.